San Francisco on a beautiful day. We made it. Awesome, thank you. I'd like to introduce Kristen Charles, who's got a few welcoming remarks.
Hello, and you took my first words away, which were welcome to San Francisco. If you saw this, I don't know how many of you were here in town last night and saw the sky, but it was incredible red, pink, orange, beautiful. I believe the same red sky at night there was the light, so it should be continuing to be a beautiful day, at least today. Who knows what's going on here. But I bring you greetings from on behalf of the City College of San Francisco Board of Trustees, our Chancellor, Don Griffin, Vice Chancellor Philip McGuire, who is very sorry that she can't be here today. I am the Dean of Grants and Resource Development at City College of San Francisco. And so I had the pleasure of watching the birth of MPICT, starting with a project that turned into a center. It's been a really exciting few years, quite a few years now. Today, I understand there are 188 registrations, so we have educators here from all over the country, and even some from China. So we welcome you all back here. That's pretty incredible. And we also have incredible turnout from business and industry. Of course, that is the reason we're all here ultimately. And we have a bunch of wonderful co-hosts listed over here, and just extend our deepest gratitude to them for their partnerships over the years, especially today, of course, but it's just an ongoing relationship that's really vital to the health of MPICT and the whole ICT industry, really, ultimately. And then also, of course, thank you to Microsoft for hosting us here today, San Francisco State University as well. And, of course, we really wouldn't be here without the National Science Foundation, and so a huge thank you to them as well. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, what she said. So now I'd like to introduce Steve Ruggiero from Facebook. Anybody not know who Facebook is? You have to leave. Thanks.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm kind of honored to be here. That you would even be interested in some of my personal observations around of how technology and kind of IT has developed and what's, I think, valuable in the future. So just to get started, I realized a few caveats. One is your guys' job's hard. Mine's here to stand up here and give opinions. I have 2 young children, and I think the hardest thing about teaching them, I haven't taught in an academic space, but the hardest thing about teaching them is convincing them that I actually know what I'm talking about sometimes. You don't know what you're talking about, Dad. Yes, I do. And then I think the other thing is listening to them, because I learn so much from them. So I have a great appreciation for what you guys do daily. And this is my perspective. The Silicon Valley is sometimes a myopic place, and it's a little bit of a bubble. I come from upstate New York, and I work in Arizona as well. So it's a bit different. Sometimes it's a little bit of a bubble. And Facebook and the technology area is definitely a bubble. It's a company that's doing things in new ways. I don't think things have been necessarily proven out. So the caveat is you're my age right there. This is my perspective on what I've come over over the past, 21, 22 years. But so what I want to talk about a little bit is, for the agenda, is when I started my career in technology, in IT, there were fairly traditional skills that were required, and I talked a little bit about those. And as time has moved, and I've moved through my different spaces in my career, there's been kind of less and less traditional things prized, less and less traditional things that are predictors of success. And I want to touch on the traditional, kind of the less traditional, and then kind of some of the stuff that I've encountered moving at Facebook, which I think it's an indicator for the future. And I think we're going to see more and more companies prize these less traditional things. And then I just end up with some very specific technologies that that are not only hot, but that I think that are going to be foundational for the future, and some cultural aspects of companies in the future. So let's see how it goes. Give you a little bit of context, because you always need context when you get information. I've been in technology for somewhere between 20 to 23 years. I've done a lot of different things. I've been a Unix systems developer, done C programming, when AI and expert systems were kind of in vogue. This is where I started out. I was working with Electric Power Research Institute. Eventually found my way to Silicon Valley and worked in semiconductor for 12 years. And semiconductor is somewhat of an old and stagey industry, if you will. They're process-oriented, they're risk-averse, they move very, very slow, incremental growth. And then I've done the startup gig in Silicon Valley, a couple different startups, which is the antithesis, really, of semiconductor, which is fast, nimble, agile, high risk. So I feel that I have a fairly good, broad spectrum of experiences to draw upon. So that's why I'm really excited to come here and talk today. So, I mean, this is really the whole talk, if you will. When I first started out, a lot of emphasis on that top green bubble, which was technical depth and operations. And I remember going into interviews when I got out of college and trying to find a job. And they were very, very focused interviews on what had you done technically, what languages did you know, how did you program, did you operate computers, have you had a computer and have you played with it, broken it, fixed it, and almost no emphasis on communication skills, on teaming, on influencing skills, and completely far out on the horizon was any expectation that I would have any understanding about business whatsoever. It was, you know, we wanted you for this very narrow spectrum. We wanted you to do this very narrow thing. And if you could do it as an expert, great. And as you got into the work world, what you found was the people who were succeeding were the people who were gurus, who were the Unix guy who knew everything top to bottom. And eventually you get pushed to management, which didn't have communication or teaming or leadership skills. And things went awry. So I've seen a more holistic approach over the past 20 years, from the technology skills becoming somewhat commoditized and those being table stakes, and communication, teaming, influencing skills starting to be prized for management, for planning, and for leadership. And then over the past 5 or 6 years, IT has gone through a pretty dramatic shift, which is you're expected to be a business person. We don't care about that IT stuff underneath the hood, but we're expecting you to know business and how technology affects and impacts business. And this has been a general march that I've seen through my career. And then when I got into Facebook and when I started doing the startup gig, it's not only been that you're expected to know technology, business, and communication, but you better be doing something you love. You better be doing something that you have a passion for, and you better be doing something that you eat, breathe, live every single day. And I think that's the real story about what the skills are that are going to be needed in the future, which is it's this synthesis of business, communication, teaming, people, and technology skills all wrapped around what you want to do as a person. And I see that more and more in Silicon Valley. I see it in the job interviews we do for people. And I think, this is kind of what I wanted to communicate, and I wanted to go down on different components and vectors of this. So, traditional stuff, like I said, table stakes. Show up, do your homework, read the manual, know the technology. And we do look for analytic skills. We look for the ability to form hypotheses, computer science foundations, being an expert in your technical domain. And the rigor that I got from my physics and computer science career, or education, the rigor I got serves me daily. And when I do my 8th grade homework with my son every night for an hour, I pound on him on math and science for 2 reasons. One is that rigor, that analysis and critical thinking, the ability to hold a problem in your head, be precise, move through the problem, and get to the answer in a rigorous fashion is absolutely necessary in technology. You meet people who are just brilliant, and they are focused, and they are quick, and they have a rigor. And the way I have found that I could somewhat keep up, certainly not lead, but somewhat keep up, is my math and science training. It made me sit down. It made me quiet myself. It made me go step to step. It made me understand everything. And I think that basis and demanding that from students is so very important because these are brilliant people who are changing the world, and they have that focus. And this is I think, the academic area that gives that focus. And then less traditional is I broke it down into 3 things. One is, when I was in school, I knew there was an answer somewhere always. I didn't have the teacher's key, perhaps, but I knew there was usually an answer, and I was trying to find the answer. And then I look back on my most best educational experiences, and they were the ones that actually we didn't even know if there was an answer. And this is what I'm called upon to do every day, is that there is no right answer. And finding a data to support your argument, having the ability to be decisive with incomplete information, hugely valuable in what I do every day, and taking action in the face of uncertainty. I walked into my boss's office one day, and she said, what's the, I forgot what it was, what's the cost per laptop that we're going to need next year and the year after? And I was like, well, I got to go and look. I pay you not necessarily to know the right answer right now, but I need this answer because I'm going into a meeting and I need a ballpark guess. And it's got to be within 10 or 20%. So that's what I need from you. And there's an example of there is no right answer, really. There's taking knowledge, synthesizing that, taking action in the face of uncertainty, and moving. Because if you can't do that, and you wait for the right answer, it's always too late in business. It's always too late in what we're doing in Facebook. If you find the right answer, someone else has it, and you've lost your advantage. So the ability to move with uncertain data. And then the center one is, gurus are not required anymore. It's certainly nice to be very deep and very knowledgeable, but it's team. Things are too complex for any one person. You see these guys turning out technology that is across multiple domains and across multiple stacks. And what you realize is that things are too complex to do something anymore. Where you could sit down and write a program before, you can't do that anymore. You need people around you to team and to develop and to produce something. And this fits in with influencing and leadership. And in the most extreme case, if you take Facebook, it's really a team tool. It's, Facebook translated the entire site by using crowdsourcing. What they did was they went to the users and said, hey, translate these pages into French, into every language on the planet, and they did it in something like a month. Whereas if you had done this with a team of people and you went and got their expertise in languages, it would have taken you years. So the ability to leverage each other is becoming more pronounced as we move through technology. And Facebook is just one example of this. So teaming is going to be so much more important. When I was in college, we wrote a multi-processing operating system, a little play system on an Apple IIe computer. And it was one of the most instructive things I've ever done. You had to team up with 5 different people in the group. You had to decide what your specialties were. You had to plan the project. It was a full semester project. And the skills in relating and driving the project and planning and influencing your fellow team members hugely valuable. And then, and I'm not real good in business, but over my career I've had an education in each of the companies I've had. And some basic business concepts are just critical. And I think in some sense I wish I had done a business school, at least some amount of business school, which when I was going through school I was always very enamored with technology and I always pushed away business. But I would motivate you to motivate your students to have them get some fundamental understanding of business. I mean, daily I'm dealing probably more with business than I am with technology in some sense. You know, CapEx versus OpEx. You know, do I want to capitalize that and depreciate it over 3 years, or do I want to take the hit right up front? And this is critical for my budget and how I manage to buy things. What's the cycle time for my business? Order to cash, what's that cycle look? When an order comes in, how does it get into cash into the company? What's the time it takes to do that? How can I affect and reduce that cycle through technology? Makes the business successful, makes me successful, makes the department successful. And these are the terms that are talked about at the table with strategy, right? It's not, the storage, it's not the computers, it's not the desktops, it's order to cash cycle. And if you can affect order to cash cycle, you can go in, talk to Microsoft Word and say, I think we should do this. So in some sense, you know, business is the aim of technology, and I think that for your students, drawing that connection is hugely valuable. And then non-traditional stuff. I always like the quote by Western Media that saw no value in the telephone. So that pushing those non-traditional boundaries. And what I've seen recently, more pronounced recently, I would say, is, you know, this passion for always learning at every step and in every way, and the ability to self-teach. I remember I quit a job about 10 years ago, and my father, who was a federal employee and grew up in the Depression, and he said, you know, it's a good job, why are you quitting that? And I said, you know, Dad, I just don't find that I'm going to work anymore. I have passion for this. And he looked at me like I was like from another planet, right? It was just completely beyond him why you would quit the job because you weren't passionate about it. But the people who you interact with daily have this internal passion that drives them morning and night. And you have to find that passion in yourself, and you have to learn daily. A disdain for experts. I find a certain disdain for experts in the industry, but at the same time, willing to seek truth from anybody who has a truthful answer, which may be an expert at some time. Seek out people who are smarter than yourself and hire them. This is, you know, A people hire A people, B people hire C people, which is a quote we always use at Facebook. But it's you know, when you find that person who can do this better than you, give it to them, get out of the way, because they're smarter than you are, and actually you can reap a lot of rewards from that. And I find this more and more. It's less about areas of control in companies, and it's more about finding the right people, putting them in the way of the problem, and getting out of the way. That solutions, I think we touched on, are multidisciplinary. They're across many aspects. And then the most powerful technical answer just leads to paralysis analysis. You know, we have a saying at Facebook that is done is better than perfect, which is iterate, get it done, move on, don't make it perfect. Because if it's perfect, you've already lost. It takes too long to be perfect. And then this is the one that always amazes me. When I look at Mark Zuckerberg, when I look at the leaders of the past that I've worked with who I've admired, they've all been good storytellers. They've been able to grab a theme, connect with the people around them, and put what they're trying to get across into the context of a story that relates to people. And if you see leaders of business, if you see politicians, these are good storytellers. They're able to weave a yarn that means something to you, and it connects you to what they're trying to get across. Good storytelling, I tell you, is a great asset in what I do. I get up and give presentations, and the technology is complex. The finances are complex. I have executives who don't want to listen to me really. They want to get out of the room and get on to the next thing. And what they're looking to do is make a decision. So I can't bring them through all the detail. I have to tell them a story that holds together and leads them to a place where they see what the decision points are, and then they can make a decision. And it's not about the detail. Certainly they look through all the detail to make sure you're correct. But if you can't tell that story in front of that audience that synergizes with where they're coming from and leads them to a place where they can do their job, you're going to fail every time. So I want to talk a little bit about specific technologies that to make it a little bit more concrete in where we're headed. I did my development pre-object-oriented principles, but object-oriented, the levels of abstraction that object-oriented methodologies brings is hugely powerful, and the students of tomorrow they're very comfortable with it, and they're comfortable in a way that I don't even know that anybody in this room is comfortable with it. They just kind of do it naturally. But it's hugely important to continue to pound on this. When I was developing, I was a C programmer, and I was a damn good C programmer, and I had one thing to keep track of. The kids of today, when they're in the workplace, they use the right tool for the right job. They'll use PHP, Ruby on Rails, HTML, SQL. They go back fluidly across these different tools, and the reason they're able to do that is because of object-oriented abstraction. They're able to reach into a tool and say, okay, this is what it can do for me. I can interface with it very easily. Here's how I interface. And I take this tool, I connect it to here. Much more fluid, much more. It's expected though. You're not a C programmer. You are a software engineer and a developer that can use any tool to get the specific job done. If you're working with a database, maybe that's SQL. If you're doing something on the web, maybe it's HTML5. But most likely you're doing both, and you got to connect these two. Open source. We're seeing a huge shift in the industry towards open source. Facebook is built on open source, massively scalable, massively parallelized on free stuff. And there's a certain ethic, too, which is not only do we, as a company, build our business on open source, we also give back. We have an open computing project that has opened up our data center design and our systems design to the world. And this is where the teaming comes in. We collaborate. We've opened up our design. You can use the design. If you use the design, you're expected to give back to the community, and you're expected to improve and iterate over the design. So it's technical, it's teaming, and we use it for business. Cloud, virtualization, SaaS, this is probably old actually. We're moving into a shift where the devices we have in our hands are going to be dataless. We're going back almost to the mainframe era. Interestingly, IBM created virtualization 25 years ago. Or like 30 now, I guess. But the technology around cloud virtualization and SaaS suddenly changes things. It puts a higher import on security. It makes our devices less important and dataless. You have to understand concepts like multi-tenancy, because now you're on these big computers with other people, and do you feel comfortable being on them with other people, and what's the performance you're going to get? Networking, it makes networking hugely important. Through my entire career, if you were a network expert, you had a job. And that's right through, we've outsourced certain support aspects to overseas, for wage arbitration and for different reasons. But the network guy always was needed. Computers always need to talk together. Massively scalable, parallel architectures, and this comes back into open source really, things like Hadoop and Memcache. These are a different way to store data on a huge scale. So I think the other thing is data. I'm convinced that in the future, there's going to be huge opportunities for students and for people coming into the workforce in this area. So what we usually think about in this area is database administrators, Oracle database, is these huge vertical systems that store data in one enclosure, if you will. What's happening now with companies like Facebook, with these large web companies like Google, what's happening is they deal with data in a very, very different way. They deal with it, they hook up literally hundreds of thousands basically of desktops, of small PC computers. They link up 100,000, we have something like 800,000 of them in Facebook. And the data is stored locally on local disks, and it's striped across all those 800,000 computers. So if one of them fails, it doesn't really matter. It's replicated somewhere else, and you can get to your data. But it's a completely different paradigm from an Oracle database. It's a massively scaled, completely parallel database, if you will, that sits out in the cloud. And what is being done with this data is phenomenal. It's the reason that they can target for advertising. High-level analysis across seismic data in the West Coast to predict earthquakes. The amount of data we're producing year over year, I saw the statistics somewhere, is something like, every 2 or 3 years we produce more data than has been produced in all of human history. So if you take that exponential growth of data and the technologies to manage it, mine it, analyze it, this is something that's really only becoming on the forefront of technology, and it's enabling things like Facebook, like Google, and these internet companies. But it's going to enable analysis in science. It's going to enable analysis in math, in astronomy, in economics. And you see this in economics. You see them doing experiments across hugely massive data sets in economics, coming up with theorems that computers come up with that people actually don't come up with. It's really quite amazing, and it's the thing that's going to develop over the next 10 to 15 years. And then UI design, web, richer internet formats. And then this is my last slide. I think I'm going on a little bit long, but I get passionate. So I put technology question mark, because I believe that it's not just technology companies, it's most companies are moving in this direction. Diversity, cultural, global, multiple perspectives, very skilled. We hire people because it's a skill set we don't have. Maybe it's not technical, but it adds to the team. Innovative, they're demanded. Iterative learning, done is better than perfect, I mentioned. And its impact is what matters most. It's not seniority, it's not hierarchy, it's not your knowledge. It's what did you do for me today? And how are you moving the needle in our business? That's what really matters. There's a relentless drive to eliminate hierarchy. When I came to the workplace, it was fairly hierarchical. Now, it's a web. It's not a tree. It's definitely a web. And it's dynamic. It flows around what we do and the projects we have. It doesn't necessarily remain static for teams. And social for everything, right? It's transparent. We use it to review hiring. I mean, we run the business on Facebook. When you get hired, you have a bunch of people from across the company who interview, come together, and talk about cultural diversity, talk about cultural fit, talk about technical acumen, talk about understanding of business. We've hired people because we've said, you know what? Didn't find them very passionate. Didn't seem that they like what they do, even though they seem to do it very well. So that social teaming aspect, it gets you in the door. And then employees, the shift in the employees over the past 20 years has just been humorous. I'm old. And these kids come in and they demand inclusion in the decision making, a space to innovate, a say in the policy. They demand a workplace that drives their passion. And I must say, it's taught me a lot of stuff and it's made me young. So I guess that's all I have to say. Again, I appreciate your listening to my remarks. It's been quite a kind of a fun ride, and I'm learning these days more than I'm teaching. So that's good as well. So thank you very much.
So our much coveted certificate of appreciation. Was that fabulous or what? I'd like to encourage all of us to come back and listen to this again, because you did a fabulous job boiling down comments that I've heard from business and industry people just over and over and over again. And if we don't hear that as educators, we're messing up, because the world has changed. And we really need to be preparing students in different ways and for different roles than what we've thought of in the past.
We could log into the next. Or we go to the 940, or
Let's just keep going.
just keep going with this one? Okay.
Okay, so if anybody hasn't met me yet, I'm James from MPICT, and on behalf of MPICT, welcome. In the information, knowledge, and innovation economies of the 21st century, we increasingly depend on information and communication technology, or ICT, computer stuff. Students increasingly use ICT to find their schools, to find their classes, to sign up for those classes, to get their assignments, to do their research, to complete their work, to get their grades, to send their transcripts elsewhere. Workers increasingly depend on ICT in all industries and most businesses. It's how they find their jobs. It's how they interact with human resources. It's how they do their work. It's how they communicate with people. It's how supply chains work. It's how customers are identified and supported. All kinds of organizations increasingly depend on ICT for their productivity. It's how we get efficiency today. It's how we develop our products. It's how all of our workers get their work done. It's how we connect with customers. And increasingly, ICT is important in society. It's how we find out about government services. It's how parents stay in touch with kids. It's how kids stay in touch with each other. It's how you find information and make use of it. But it's this really, really nutty field. It's confusing. It's chaotic. It's like we deliberately don't want people to understand what it is because of the way we use words. There's technical jargon. There's marketing speak. It's the latest I something or E something. And, I don't have Wi-Fi. I have airport. It's like we're deliberately trying to confuse people. It's complex by nature. New stuff is popping up all the time. And so there's new technologies. There's integration of old technologies. There's convergence. It evolves quickly. It's hard to keep up with. It's a tough space. But there's been a paradigm shift in the last 25 years. The world has changed. This stuff has fundamentally changed the way things work for all of us. In the U.S., we hear this term convergence a lot, where previously separate technologies are increasingly fewer integrated technologies. What in the past was multiple devices, a pager and a cell phone and a PDA and all that, is increasingly just one device. What in the past was at least 3 different networks, voice, video, data, is increasingly a converged single-purpose network. So there's this coming together of many different separate things into one thing. And most of the rest of the world calls that one thing ICT, Information and Communication Technologies. So the way we use that term, the way a lot of people use that term, it's just a big bucket that you put all this computer-related stuff in. Computers, software, networking, telecom, internet, programming, all of that stuff. And this is not a term that we made up. It's pretty much anywhere you go in the world that requires a passport, they use this term. It's used by the UN, it's used in the European Union, Australia, Canada, the World Bank, International Telecommunication Union. It's a common phrase in the rest of the world. So it's a superset. Hardware doesn't do as much without software. Software doesn't do anything without hardware. Networking is a combination of hardware and software. The internet is networking. Telecom is now networking. So all of these things are interrelated. They're interdependent. And at some level, we need to be able to think of these things all together. When we're doing public policy planning, when we're planning what educational systems do to develop the ICT workforce, we need to think about all these things together. Just because we use an ICT term doesn't mean that these other terms go away. It doesn't mean that networking ceases to exist as a word or as a field. But we've got this big picture context in which we can place networking. So MPICT and the ICT Center have been championing the use of this term here in our region and across the country. It's an increasingly flat world. We should line up behind something. The rest of the world uses this term. If you want a good practical reason for why to use this term, you can't Google IT. Right? Every single article in the English language shows up if you search IT. So you can search IT. And so that allows you to get to information about your field. So part of what we do is to champion the importance of ICT. And we've been aggregating things together, doing labor studies, talking about how important this stuff is for economic growth and development at all levels, for workforce development. You need people who can do this stuff if we're going to realize the benefits of ICT throughout society. Within the educational context, the world has changed. We need to think about use of ICT in how education functions and how we deliver instruction. And, for society, because we really need to be, behind this paradigm shift. So we're funded by the National Science Foundation. The Advanced Technological Education Group is focused on the applied technology domain. So the technicians, people who go out and touch real gear in the real world. Community colleges play an important role with that. They develop more of that hands-on workforce than the four-year colleges and universities. So NSF acknowledges that through this ATE program. And there are quite a few of the ATE centers and funded organizations that have come together for this event. So MPICT people in the room, raise your hand. So there's Craig, Steve, Olivia, there are others. I think most of us have a red, whatever this is, lanyard on. So find us and talk to us. The ICT Center, there's Gordon, Baytech, Deborah, Cassia, they couldn't make it here. They're security-oriented from Chicago. Cyberwatch, Casey, I saw you earlier. IWITS, Donna, Geotech, Bill. So we're not isolated. There's a community of these NSF-funded centers around the country, and we share information with each other. We're all sort of focused on the same thing, which is to improve technical education at community colleges. So, big picture standpoint, it's bleak out there, right? Can we agree on that? It's hard times. Anybody sad to see 2011 go? No, probably not. It's been a rotten economy. It's been particularly bad for education. There's been funding cuts just over and over again. We're beleaguered. We have to argue for just keeping our programs alive. They're cutting classes. They're cutting people. It's a rotten climate, and we feel bad about that. There's a human reaction to that, right? We all hunker down, we cower, we feel bad, we're afraid, we're reluctant to make decisions. We're not going to innovate. We're not going to take on new projects. It's a climate of anxiety and bad feeling, right? That's the world that we operate in. Well, I'm going to argue that we should take a different attitude. And it's based on, in part, labor market information, some studies we've done. A year ago, we did this study. Some of you are familiar with it. We used the ICT framework for the first time here in California. What does it look like if we aggregate all this stuff in one big bucket and look at how big an important industry is in California, ICT industry? How big and important is ICT employment? If we don't think of telecom as something different from software development, as something different from networking, we just put all this stuff in together. Well, in California, it turns out ICT industries are big and important. Intuitively, we kind of know that, but 4% of all companies in the state, 6% of private sector revenues, 4% of the workforce, but 12% of private sector wages. Number two, as an industry sector in private sector wages, if you look at this as an aggregation, they pay, twice the average. ICT industry jobs pay twice the average. And these industries are doing well. They're growing. So I'll just give you one of these, just to show the point. If you look at these aggregations of industry at a two-digit NAICS code level, the closest thing to ICT is down there where that blue arrow is, where it says information. And so if you're a policymaker and you're looking at a list, what are the big industries in California? Well, first of all, information is about halfway down the list. And if you look, the light green shaded stuff is what we consider ICT. That's the technical domain. Also in that category are a bunch of things like newspapers that are doing bad. You know, newspapers are shrinking, and that makes that industry segment, information, look like it's not performing well. When in fact, if you look at the light green, the red arrow in the third line, aggregated ICT in terms of wages paid would be number 2 in the state. So there's a strategic reason for using the ICT aggregate, because things rise up higher in the list. They get more attention from policymakers and planners. And that's one of the things we've been doing strategically. Does anybody recognize that? That's the bridge of the original Star Trek Enterprise. 25, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we thought that was pretty cool, right? That motivated a lot of us to do things. Every single thing on that bridge exists today. All of the communication devices, the sensors, the controls, the commands, the video interface, all that's here already. And some of the guys down in the other sections are doing as well. And warp drive, those guys are way behind. Transporter technologies, those guys, they're slackers. But in the ICT domain, we're killing it, right? We're doing good stuff. We should feel good about that. It's exciting. Anybody see this one? Call of Duty 3? $775 million in sales in its first 5 days. 5 days. So this trilogy now has already earned more than $6 billion worldwide. Compare that to Lord of the Rings. That's something we all think of as huge, right? $3 billion, more than twice the gross revenues worldwide. So far from a geek-produced product, right? We're doing great. So by the end of the first day, gamers had already logged 7 million hours of play on this title. Wow. I mean, that's mind-blowing. This is in this miserable climate, this bad economy that we're all talking about. This is an out-of-the-park home run. And this is us. This is the geeks that are doing this. These are good jobs, and this is fun, and people are getting excited about it. Richest Americans in 2011. Everybody recognizes those names. Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, thank you Microsoft for hosting this stage for us today. Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, the first of you guys. Larry Ellison at Oracle, Amazon, Dell, Google guys. 40% of the top 20 richest Americans are from this ICT domain. So you're looking for heroes, you're looking for motivation to enter this field. Well, here it is. You can be very, very successful in this space. And speaking of heroes, everybody, knows who this is, Steve Jobs. The most influential people in the world. The man has changed business forever. How he changed our world. That's inspiring. This is a hero. For me, this is basically a rich hippie who changed the world. That's what I want to be when I grow up. So that's, it's an exciting space. It's doing great. Number 1 Christmas holiday gift. I've had 2. So yay for ICT, right? This is not that. It's doing great. This stuff is cool, and you're involved in it. Good for you. Who's heard this one? All the IT jobs went to China and India. I'll tell you what the appropriate response to that is. And I'm from the South. Balls are dashed. It's absolutely nonsense. So do this with me. So all the IT jobs went to China and India. And how do we respond? Balls are dashed. Yes. So ICT employment is not just limited to ICT industries. It's not just the software companies. It's not just the hardware companies. It's not the service providers alone. ICT employment exists in every industry. Every organization has an IT department. Biotech would not exist as an industry without ICT. Where would financial services be without online trading systems and massive databases and security systems? Healthcare is an area where ICT is really just being applied appropriately now. That's not a new field, that's just ICT. ICT employment is everywhere. So we wanted to look at it, this aggregate ICT employment, no matter where it exists. 1 in 20 jobs in the U.S. 1 in 20 jobs in the U.S. today, and they're growing fast. So this is a huge area. Same thing in California, 1 in 20 jobs in 2010. 12% employment growth, 130,000 new jobs between 2006 and 16. They pay twice the median wage. 8th largest occupational cluster by job count. This is not small. This is not unimportant. This is a huge area of employment, and it's strategically important. So we went out. We talked to more than 600 companies in California. 80% of them agreed or strongly agree that ICT is important to the productivity of their organization. So overall estimates for employment growth, 3.8% over 2 years. That's consistent with everything we've seen in the past. ICT companies expect 8.5% employment growth. Non-ICT expected to be flat over the next 2 years. So ICT is doing well. Companies that offer ICT goods and services are performing well relative to others. So ICT companies expect 11.2% growth in their ICT workforce, even though they expect overall only 8.5% employment growth. So within ICT industry, ICT workforce is doing better than other categories of jobs. Non-ICT companies, flat overall growth, they're still expecting 3.7% overall ICT workforce growth. Amazingly, even in this miserable climate, over half of all firms report difficulty finding appropriately skilled workers in the ICT domain. That's a call to arms, isn't it? That's amazing. With the number of unemployed people we have today, that there are employers who can't find work, that's messed up. We've got to fix that. So this is a Robert Half salary guide for 2012. Just look down the right column. This is the percentage change in starting salaries in the U.S. across a whole bunch of different ICT categories. The point is, they're all up. The salaries commanded for all of these ICT roles are up year over year. This is a good time to be an ICT worker. And it's not that everyone has to have an advanced degree to work in this field. In California, half of the firms do not require a bachelor's degree for at least half their workforce, their ICT workforce. So the macro economy is miserable, it's bad, it's ugly out there. We could be feeling despair and just crumple up with anxiety. But if we focus on our field, ICT, I would argue that it's actually a pretty rosy time, and we should feel good about it. So let's focus on what we do, which is to help people be successful in this space. And let's be positive about it, because it really is a good time. So we also did a phase 3 workforce study this summer that came out, basically taking it to the next level. We looked at workforce demand here in California, 1.2 million workers, 30,000 new jobs through 80,000 job openings, high wages, same basic outcomes we saw before. But we've got work to do. This is a chaotic space. So we use one of these real-time labor market information services that crawl the public internet, and they aggregate the job postings from job boards and employer sites and headhunters, recruiters. We had them look at one market here in California. More than 2,000 total job listings, 23 total job listings. 1,928 had unique job titles, right? Even those that have the same job title have different job descriptions. So how do we as educators make sense of that? How do we figure out what the demand is for knowledge and skills in the ICT workforce? It's hard. Here in California, more than 500,000 enrollments in ICT courses every year. But you look at the supply. As part of the study, we looked at the ICT programs in 48 California community colleges in the MPICT region. 129 different academic departments had 93 different names. When you look at the degrees, 303 different associate level degrees, 263 unique degree titles. In the certificate area, 606 certificates, 522 unique titles. That's not serving us well, because when you're an employer, I'm going to hire somebody for a job. I'm collecting resumes. I get a resume that says degree or certificate in computer something or another. I have no idea what that person knows and can do. So that's devaluing all of these academic credentials. We need to have some sort of a common standard for what it is that we're developing and producing as educators. But in short, this labor market is chaos. It really is, the supply side and the demand side is just a free-for-all. And we need to do better with that. There's a problem in this space that I call the Tower of Babel. And that is, people can't communicate about ICT because there's so many different words and they have different meanings to different people. And people's perspectives are so different. This stuff is pervasive. It's everywhere. And my perspective as a small employer is very different from the perspective of a large employer or somebody in a different industry or somebody who's focused on this particular technology or on the development of technology versus its implementation. So we think we're having communication about this space, but we're not. There's this Tower of Babel effect, just this blather that's going on, and we can't make productive progress in this area. Remember the parable about the blind people in the elephant. So they all touch the elephant in a different place, and they try to describe what they encountered, and they all describe something fundamentally different. It's like a snake, it's like a tree. Well, we have that problem in ICT. And part of what we've been trying to do recently is to help develop tools that make communication more effective about this space. One of the areas where there's confusion is about ICT and education. So we talk about IT or ICT and education, and there's a whole bunch of different dimensions to that, and they get jumbled up and confused with each other. One is to use ICT to improve the efficiency of school operations. So we need a better HR department. We need better management software. We need to implement these technologies so that we operate more efficiently as enterprises, as schools. There's the idea that we need to use ICT to improve teaching and learning. It doesn't matter what field we're talking about. We need to engage students. We need to involve them with technology so that the experience is better and the learning improves. There's the dimension of digital literacy, which is everybody needs to know how to use this stuff today. It's as important as reading and writing and arithmetic. So there needs to be some competency that we develop for everybody so that they can be successful in life. There's the ICT traditional academic dimension, which is preparing people for baccalaureate and higher degrees with deep understanding of transfer pathways, understanding scientific principles, and so forth. But then there's also workforce preparation. So developing technicians, people for hands-on roles. And to be able to segment these conversations, I think is helpful for being able to move ahead productively. We've used this ICT pyramid effectively to talk about depth of knowledge and skills. So at the base here is the user level, and that's a big group. Everybody's a user today. Everybody needs to be able to do something with these technologies. The line just above it represents entry level into the field. This is people who know how to use computers well enough to help other users, help desk roles, technical support people, people who help users make good use of these technologies. The middle layer is enablers, the applied technology domain, people who touch gear. They go out and install mature technologies in the real world so that we realize the benefit of that. This is the IT operations of all kinds of organizations. And at the top of the pyramid is the creator domain, R&D, people who are innovating, advancing the field, developing new technologies. Between the creators and the enablers, there's a line which represent the interaction between creators and their customers. So salespeople, sales engineers, technical support specialists, people who help design customer solutions, who get requirements and specifications. But again, ICT isn't just limited to ICT industries, it's in every industry. So we tweaked this just a little bit because there's some industry-specific stuff. If you're in the energy world, you may need to know something about SCADA. If you're in financial services, you need to understand about trading systems. If you're in healthcare, you need to know something about health records, about regulatory requirements for that industry. There's enterprise-specific stuff. And there's the phenomenon of technology migration. So desktop publishing is a good example of that. That starts out as something in the creator domain, R&D. Only very specialized people develop this new capability to do publishing electronically. It gets pushed out into jobs, and there is a Department of Labor job classification for desktop publishers. But the numbers in that category are dropping. Does that mean desktop publishing is going away? No. It means that those skills are now available to users. So you no longer have a job called desktop publishing. You do desktop publishing as a part of your job, whatever that other job is. So technology is being pushed down through this model, if you will. And we found this tool very effective. It's a good way to talk about different levels of knowledge and skills. So again, here at the base level, users, digital literacy, everybody. See, potentially a huge issue for education. So, by the time you get out of K-12, you should have this stuff, right? You should know how computers operate. You should be able to do research. You should be able to use networks. If you don't get it, community college should remediate it. And that means lots and lots of students for the departments that you all work in. At the top of the level, the innovator domain, it's really kind of simple. And this is a lot like the Venn diagram that you had, Steve. It's a combination of hardware and software knowledge with business skills. So let's find a problem, a business opportunity, and let's apply our hardware and software and business and management knowledge to create a solution for that, which we're then going to sell. This is the engine of innovation. This is what drives Silicon Valley. And it's really kind of simple conceptually. When it gets into the real world, though, it gets really chaotic, because the real world is this universe of all the stuff that's been created by the innovators over time. And you're in the real world IT operation of your enterprise, you got to try to make sense of all this stuff. What am I going to use? Who do I have to have? How am I going to organize myself so that my organization gets the benefit of all of these technologies that have been developed? So it's messy, it's chaotic at the IT operation level. It's complex, it changes constantly. It's like trying to identify, the composition of a spinning atom, through tools that are inadequate. And that's a challenge for us because most of us are at the community college level. So what is the technology that we need to be teaching people? I don't know. Today it's one thing, tomorrow it's another thing. How do we keep up? It's hard. So here's a little model that we use to try to communicate input from lots and lots of business and industry people about what they're looking for from education in ICT workforce development. And at the bottom of that is a strong academic foundation: reading, writing, arithmetic, knowledge of how the world works, history. They expect that. So creativity, business fundamentals. But there's a component of this that they're asking for today that we haven't dealt with yet, and that again is that digital literacy level. And there's probably three components of that. There's technical knowledge and skills. That's the ICT literacy. There's the ability to do research, information literacy, and those efforts are going strong. Library-based groups have been pushing that forward, and that works pretty well. There's also digital media literacy, the ability to communicate effectively through these mediums. And there's work that needs to be done. This needs to be built into our academic foundation. That second level is called a bunch of different things: soft, professional, personal, workplace effectiveness skills. This is a lot of the stuff that Steve talked about. And this is a whole dimension of conversation. It comes up in every single conversation with business and industry people. We've got to deliver this somehow. People are coming out of school without it too frequently. So how are we going to develop a work ethic in people? An ability to show up on time or call if you're going to be late, having reasonable expectations about what's going to happen when you hit the workplace, being flexible, taking responsibility for your ongoing growth, being able to get the information you need to make decisions, being able to help decision makers make decisions. All of these kinds of things are important, and we have to change the way we teach if we're going to make this happen, because chalk and talk lecture doesn't do it. There's no multiple choice tests in the real world. So again, at the center of this diagram is all the technologies, all these different things that are getting implemented. And IBM talks a lot about a T-shaped revolution. So from a technology perspective, you need some broad understanding of a whole bunch of different technologies, because you got to work together with teams of people that have expertise in these other areas. You have to know what they know. You have to know what they can do. But you also need a unique value add, some sort of depth in one technical domain. The big red box on the outside is you need people who can participate in the real world, who understand the industry that you operate in and the culture that you exist in. They're culturally sensitive. They understand how to interact with customers and suppliers. They understand that there is a regulatory domain, a legal dimension to what you do. The first circle on the inside is you need people who understand organizational mission and culture, who know what we're here to do and can figure out some way to add value to that and what they do in that workplace. And then the center circle is the IT operation itself. So the IT operation is organized to accomplish something. It's to provide that infrastructure for the entire organization. So how do you do that? How do you keep track of your technology? How do you serve your users? How do you make business decisions? How do you manage your efforts? So, good times for ICT as an industry, good times for ICT employment, but we need to be smarter about what we do as ICT educators. We need to apply some leverage. Right now, everybody's kind of doing their own thing in every different school, and that's really inefficient. We're all having to start flat-footed from scratch and make up something that's fundamentally different from what everyone else is doing. So let's line up. We've got to change the way we do things. And that's part of what this event is an opportunity to share, to get out of our little silos and share stories. So from the perspective of industry, here's resources that they offer to make our jobs easier. So Cisco Academy, NetApp is here, Citrix, Microsoft. There's a bunch of industry-driven efforts that provide resources of use for educators. Those are the ones, if you'll get out your agenda from your folder and take a look at that. It's really extraordinary. And this is the sewing suit that you've all put together by offering your presentations and wisdom. Those that are shaded orange are from business and industry in some fashion. Those that are shaded pink are focused on issues related to improving diversity in ICT education and workforce. This is a problem. As this workforce becomes more and more important and larger, the only way we're going to meet the needs is if we're drawing from all the different segments of our society. And we're not right now. We need to do a better job attracting and serving and helping people be successful in ICT from all kinds of different backgrounds. Those that are shaded green are from the educator community. And there's great stuff here. You know, we can't all do everything well. There's too much if we're responsible for creating everything from scratch. So let's learn from each other. That's great. You know, if you're doing something really, really well, I can learn from that and emulate that. And I'll share with you the thing that I'm doing really, really well. And we all benefit in the process. So I would point out a little change that's just happened. What was room 619 downstairs is now room 610. And what was room 610, where we are going to have lunch, is now 612. So you may want to just mark that down on your agenda or figure it out when you get downstairs. We are just going to go down one floor to San Francisco State University. They've got some real nice classrooms down there. And I think you're going to like that space. We're very, very pleased to have a collaborative relationship with Blaine and CCC Confer. CCC Confer, for those of you not familiar with it, basically is an online collaboration tool that's offered free to all California community colleges through a grant that Blaine put together. It uses the Blackboard Collaborate platform, which is like WebEx or Adobe Connect. So if you are a presenter, try to show up 10 minutes early before your presentation so you can work it out with the facilitator in your room to make available your presentation in real time to people over the internet. And also to record and archive that presentation for future viewing. We can't all be in all of these presentations. And this is a way of expanding the impact of this event beyond those relatively few who can be in the room to lots of different people. If anybody does not want to do that, that's fine. Just tell your technical facilitator, I'd rather not record this or make it available over the internet. No big deal. But do try to get there early so you can work it out with them. Inevitably, there's a few glitches with technology when you do something like that. If that happens, be patient, network with each other. Routinely, people tell us when they attend events like this that the connections that you make with each other are among the most valuable components. There's a fabulous group of people right here in this room, leaders, subject matter experts, people who do what you do, who have connections that could be valuable to you. So get to know each other. To facilitate that, we're going to have a little happy hour event tonight. At 5:30, Cengage Learning has generously offered the booze, which we can't pay for with NSF money. So there's beer and wine and some snack food. We're going to go around the corner to the City College of San Francisco downtown campus, which when you go downstairs, you go right to 4th Street and then right down to Mission. It's catty corner from the Sony Mestrion. It's right by the big Jukebox Marriott Hotel. There on the ground floor is a restaurant called the Educator Palette. It's run by the students in the culinary arts program there. That's a good opportunity to connect and relax and debrief and get to know each other. So there's one thing that we all have in common in this room, and that is a belief that ICT and ICT education and ICT workforce development is important. And it's good to have that common ground, some reason to work with each other. And that's the ideal that unifies us. So one of the things that came from our study was that about half of California companies didn't know or had no opinion about whether community colleges are doing a good job developing the ICT workforce. So that's a challenge. That's something that we need to do a better job with. We need to be less chaotic in what we offer and do a better job communicating what we do. For those of you who are from business and industry, I didn't even know what a community college was 5 years ago. I'm a business guy myself, and I stumbled across the community college mission and just realized that it's important. If we need ICT knowledge and skills in our society to advance, to move forward, community colleges are the most cost-effective way to push those knowledge and skills out there in our communities. California is $26 a unit. So for less than $100, you can take that same class. It's going up to 46. This is the last time I said that. Painful. But still, so what is that? Less than $150 for that same class. It's going to cost you $2,500 with Global Knowledge, one of the commercial providers. The mission is so diverse. It's anything from a bright high school student who wants to get a leg up to someone very late in their career who needs to retool. There's a surprising number of students in these programs that already have a bachelor, a master's, even a PhD degree, who come to the community college because it's an affordable way to keep up with technology change. So community college is not just junior college. It's not just remediation. In the ICT domain, it plays a really important role. So we would encourage your engagement with community college ICT education. We think this is important. Evaluation is important to us. You'll find in your package a little evaluation form. Please try to complete that before you leave. And you can trade that in for a raffle ticket. We have a raffle at the very end of our event. There's also a raffle tonight at the reception. There's a card for that in your name badge. So, the point is not we care what our grade is as much as we'd like input from you in what we could be doing in NSF centers and how to make events like this better in the future. So for those of you in the MPICT region and from California anywhere. I just point out our faculty development week dates are now out. This is a week-long training session where you learn new technology or new ways of teaching. We're doing one in Southern California the week of June 11th and one in Northern California the week of June 25th. Also, right now what RSA is, the security conference here in San Francisco. So they're doing something a little different this year. They're going to build a studio in the Moscone Center and broadcast out from that sessions that they do with experts from the field. And they've made an offer to us, which we can offer to you, to become the studio audience for that series of shows. So if you as a teacher and if you would like to bring your students to be the studio audience at the RSA show, email Becky, and there's a flyer out on the reception table. You can grab that. It's pretty cool. You get a free expo pass too. So very pleased about that. And then just again, welcome. I'm so glad that everyone's come out. The weather's produced for us here. It's gorgeous in San Francisco. I hope you'll be able to enjoy the city some this evening and over the weekend. Again, it's bleak times out there, but it's a good time for ICT. It's a good time for ICT education. It's a good time for ICT workers. So we got into this because we're passionate about technology, because we're passionate about helping students be successful, build good lives for themselves, and those opportunities exist right now. They're as good as they've ever been. So let's feel good about what we do. Take advantage of this event. Let's learn from each other. Let's make good connections. And thank you for coming. Thank you.